Nicole, can you just promote the ASL interpreters?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Where is it? It's under participants, right?
Yeah, right. And then just hover
Okay.
over their name.
And then Nicole, do you have preference for what we've done in the past is Jenny and Judith, if you got when you're not speaking, if you can stop your video so that way the ASL interpreters are larger on the viewers' screens, that would be helpful. And the way that you do that is you just hover over the little video icon and turn it on and off.
Ray was already listed as a co-host, and I think Nikki, did you get the dialog box on your screen that said you were being made into a co-host?
I may have missed it.
Okay, let's see. Make co-host. There you go. You should have it now.
Perfect. Yes.
Okay.
And we can see that Amy's doing a local recording. That's good.
So I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
It keeps saying that we're in a practice session.
Oh, yeah. Well, we need to start the actual webinar. And
but it's not a different link.
no, no, this is kind of like our green room.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
And
Do we want to open it up?
I'm good with that. I think Eli just has to turn off his camera, but
Yeah, I'll just get it out. I'll just get it out.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Nicole Lamerson, and I'm a researcher here at the National Research Center for Parents with Disabilities. Yeah,
We're still in a practice session.
we are.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
on the top of your
Hold on. I need to set this up so I can see my own face. I know that sounds weird, but
We can start it for you if you want.
hold on. I need to set this up so I can see my own face. I can't talk into the abyss. And why can't I do that? Do you know what I'm saying?
I mean, you're in screen share mode, so you're not going to see your own face.
I can't see the speakers when I'm in screen share mode.
Well, you could maybe on the other monitor, but
But can I drag them like over
Yes,
here? Or where do
yes.
you want it?
Over
It's
here
gonna
is
block
fine.
something.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay,
it's
I don't know
fine,
how to
thank you.
handle this.
I
but-
got it. I got
Okay.
it from here. Thank you.
Is that
I feel
okay?
like I should just
And
keep.
then let me
I should-
hide non-video participants so
Okay.
that all those things are not.
Okay.
It's okay. It's
Okay.
for 2 minutes late. It's fine.
Okay.
Hide.
and Amy, just remember in the webinar format, if anybody that doesn't have their camera on is going to be completely invisible. So it's not like, even though you
Okay,
see it as
that's
a
great.
host, the others won't see it. Yeah, the participants don't see us.
Maybe this. Oh, here, hide non-video. Okay. So now it's just you and Nikki.
Okay. Fantastic.
Did that work?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Okay. All right. We're good. We're seeing the PowerPoint.
Yep.
Thank you.
Also, I can come in if needed.
Okay, just let me know. There's a door stop. There's a door stop. Okay, just let me know when you open it up, because I can't text me and tell me when to go. Okay. I think you can go.
Would you like us to do it for you?
Yes, please.
Okay. Shall I do it now or?
Yep.
Okay. I'm gonna go live in 3, 2, 1. Just give it 10, 15 seconds before you start speaking because it'll take a while for everyone to come
Yeah,
in.
I'm gonna watch the participant numbers.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. We're just gonna give it a few minutes so that other people can join. Okay. Thanks again for coming. My name is Nicole Lamerson, and I'm a researcher here at the National Research Center for Parents with Disabilities. I'm also a parent with a developmental disability. Today, we're going to be talking about the experiences of parenting when you have a disability and you're living in a multi-generational family. We have two panelists that will be coming in about 15 minutes. And then we'll open it up for questions at the end. And I will introduce our panelists right before we start our discussion. Just a note on our funding, we're funded by the National Institute for Disability Independent Living and Rehabilitation Research. That's under the Administration for Community Living at HHS. And the views of our presentation today are solely our own, not that of our funders. And we do have closed captioning, automatic closed captioning, and you can see that at the bottom of the screen, the CC. And then if you need the speakers to appear larger, you can move the slider button over a bit to your left. And at the end, we'll be doing Q&A. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I think lots of us are familiar with Zoom by now, having had 3 long years of practice during the pandemic. Okay, so our learning objectives today are, we're going to describe the general statistics about disabled parents in the US and the challenges that they may face. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the general statistics about multi-generational households in the US. And these are families of 3 generations or more who are all living under the same roof. And we're going to talk about some of the strengths and challenges that disabled parents may face in these living situations when they are parenting their children. And finally, we're going to learn from the successes and challenges faced by 2 disabled moms who were living in multi-generational households. Okay, so disabled parents in the US. About 1 in 4 people in the United States have a disability. And if that number, it's about 26%, and that's census data. And if that number seems a little high to you, this also includes people with invisible disabilities. And we also know, because of COVID, that the number of people with disabilities who have long COVID, our numbers are going to be rising. So that's one reason why these topics about disabled parents are really important, especially right now, because we are growing our ranks due to COVID. So with 25% of the population having a disability, this works out to about 1 in 10 kids who have a disabled parent. So multi-generational households in the US, it's been on the rise since COVID. I think a lot of families, they either huddled together so they could be together during the pandemic, either out of necessity or by choice. So there was a pretty decent spike around the time of COVID. And people with disabilities in the US comprise about 25% of the population. And it turns out that 25% of US adults live in households with 3 generations or more. So I'm sure that there is definitely some overlap there between people with disabilities and people who are living in multi-generational homes. And that's the intersect that we're going to be talking about today. I just want to make sure that the caption. Hold just a second. Sorry, just a second. We're having a little technical thing.
We want to make sure that the transcript is accessible.
We just want to make sure that the transcript is accessible. Good.
Yeah,
Okay.
captions are enabled. For the person that's having trouble, I'll send you my cell number and we can work out how to make sure your captions are on.
Thanks, Amy. Sorry about that, everyone. Where was I? So BIPOC families are more likely to report living in multi-generational households. It's about a third of families, as opposed to about 19% of white families. And when we look into this research, families report a lot of benefits in terms of living together. Financial benefits, of course, benefits for people who need care. So if there's a grandparent in the home, there's assistance for that, extra assistance for that grandparent or for anybody else or for children. What I found really interesting is that there were some mental health benefits that have been documented in terms of living in a multi-generational family. And I thought that was really fantastic to see. And then also support for the continuing of education. So if young adults are living in a home with other family members, it makes it easier, especially with the cost of education currently, for them to continue education. But the one thing we don't know much about are the experiences of disabled people raising their children in a home where they have extra support from grandparents, great-grandparents, sisters and brothers, aunts and uncles. And I think this is really interesting because the home and community-based services that many people with disabilities use in the US are often not sufficient for their care needs. So that is one reason why a lot of people may be living with their families. Oop, I'm sorry. So that's one reason why people might be living with their families. But a key barrier here is that we've done some work looking at the attitudes of people around pregnancy in disabled people. And we have a bit of research showing that when people with disabilities disclose that they are pregnant, the reaction of family members tends to be negative. It's negative or it's very worrisome. It's not automatically like this happy occasion that we would think about in terms of a pregnancy. And some of that worry comes from a very valid place. We don't see a lot of disabled parents in society, so someone may be worried because they don't understand how the disabled parent is going to take care of their children. We don't see disabled people don't have role models by and large for parenting. And so they kind of have to figure it out for themselves. And if they don't have the role models for parenting, their family members who are concerned about a pregnancy, they're not seeing those role models either. So it can be a very fraught situation. So you have disabled parents living under the same roof potentially as their own parents, the grandparents, but the grandparents aren't so sure how the disabled parent is going to take care of that kid. So that's a really important intersection that we're going to be talking more about in our discussion today. And then go ahead and go on. So we're going to start our discussion. And today I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay. We have two fantastic panelists today. I'm just going to pull up their bios. Judy Brown, first of all. Judy is the founder and executive director of Project 7O Forward. She is a passionate disability advocate in Charlotte, North Carolina. Her nonprofit, Project 7O Forward, is an organization with a mission to support and advance the lives of people with disabilities through various programs, including pop-up neighborhood food support, peer support, and other community resource events. After raising her 2 boys into adulthood, Judy took her life experience to found this nonprofit. She is married and a mother to an extended family of 5 children. Jennifer Senda is our other panelist today. Jennifer is a Mexican-American mother and college student who has cerebral palsy. She uses a wheelchair. Jenny is fluent in both Spanish and English, and she is a strong advocate for parents with disabilities. Her blog posts have also been featured on the Disabled Parenting Project website. She lives in Kansas City with her 9-year-old son, who also has disabilities. Jenny believes the biggest issue facing parents with disabilities and their families is the stigma that society perpetuates on these families. So hi there, Judy and Jennifer. We're gonna do a very sort of loose discussion here. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We're gonna reserve some time for questions at the end, and we'll go ahead and get started. So the first thing I was wondering is that, could you both talk a little bit about your family history as it relates to living in a multi-generational household? Was this something that your family tended to do, you know, for many years previous, or were you the first person who decided to embark on this living situation? Judy, you want to go first?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So yes, my family has a long history that we were able to see when we did some genealogy, that our family tended to live together. We found records where family members from a census would start at 2 years old and go all the way to 90 years old, and they were all in the same home. And so in my family, it's very common for family members to live together. So it wasn't anything new.
Okay. Okay. Jenny, what about you? Oh, you're on mute, Jenny. Oh, can I unmute her? Hold on just a second.
Okay, got it.
There you
Sorry.
go. We are just fought with technical problems today.
Okay. So my family immigrated from Mexico in the 70s. I'm actually a first generation Mexican American. And so my family, we tended to live in large groups in our family because my parents didn't know the language. And so when my mother was pregnant with me, we moved into my grandmother's house.
Mm-hmm.
And so I grew up in my grandmother's house. And then eventually my mother moved out. And then it kind of repeated for all of my siblings as well. Like my sister, she lived with my mother for a while when she got pregnant. And my mother took care of the children because my sister was deployed in the military. So yeah, so it kind of follows suit. Plus, you know, when you don't know the language, you kind of stick to your own.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing. You know, sometimes people with disabilities end up being sort of trailblazers, sometimes even in their own families, and disabled parents even more. Jenny, I know that your son has disabilities, but for both of you, were you kind of the first family member that had a disability and sort of was navigating this living arrangement? Or was this common in your family that, you know, we helped other people with disabilities in our family? Judy?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jenny.
No, you go ahead. Sorry.
I kind of was the first. So, you know, I don't want to put my age out there, but years and years and decades ago, people just didn't, and I mean, some places in the country, we still deal with that, where we're not talking openly about, you know, a person's, especially if it's invisible disability, we may not talk about that. So I was that person from childhood that liked to talk about what's really happening. I didn't like, you know, trying to, you know, say, shh, that's not something that we bring up. So yeah, I was the first person that really began to talk about, you know, what is it like to navigate with a disability. And I self-identify. So I have a vision impairment, I have a hearing impairment, and later on in life, I had a mobility impairment due to several back operations. But from childhood, I was like, you know what, this is what I have to deal with. So why can't I talk about it?
Yeah. How about you, Jenny? Were you the trailblazer in your family in terms of making a living arrangement work with your disability?
So I have, so I'm a wheelchair user. My CP involves mobility issues. My parents did not believe in adapting as much. So I learned how to climb steps. I learned how to slide down steps. I learned how to use different things like sinks to transfer. And if they would say, oh, well, you can't do this. Sorry, I apologize for the dog if you can.
That's okay. That's okay. We love dogs.
You know, so I learned very, very quickly because, you know, if you tell me I can't do it, I'm gonna show you I can't. That was just I'm gonna show you I can't. And I'm not gonna hide somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm just not.
I definitely want to talk a little bit more about physical adaptations for mobility impairments and how we handle that within our family. I think there's an assumption there that our family members, because they know us the best, they might know our needs, that they're going to make the house very accessible and easy to get around. But we know that that is not the reality for a variety of reasons,
Right.
including cost, because it can be very, very expensive to modify a home, or if you're renting and that home or apartment isn't already modified, you're sort of hamstrung in what you can do. So a question for both of you: how did your own disabilities influence your decision to move in with family? Was it a choice, or was it because of circumstances, as so often happens? And Jenny, do you want to go first?
So in my case, it was more circumstance. I was told, and this is just for backstory, I was told because of my condition that I wasn't going to be able to become pregnant. And so Edward was definitely a surprise for me. And I had to move in with my cousin for a while during pregnancy because I was on bed rest. And then I moved back in with my parents. So it, you know, and so for the first few months of my son's life, you know, we lived with my parents. Maybe up until he was about 1.5 years. Consistently.
Judy, how did your disability impact your decision-making around moving in with family?
Well, at the time I was still attempting to work full-time, but I began to have some energy issues, and they eventually would be related to, you know, the pain that I was in the back, issues that I had. But it was a choice, and it was a financial one. I will be very transparent. At that time, I was living in New York, and living on your own not on my own, I was married at the time, but then having children, that was an expensive proposition. And my parents had the home. They were like, why don't you just come here? There's plenty of room. And, you know, we're not going to charge you the rent that you would. But my parents were those kind of parents. We still had to pay, but it wasn't going to be the rent that other people out there in New York had to face. And so it was great to kind of move back into my childhood home. It was still a great neighborhood. And then also, as they were aging, they needed help. So it actually did work out for me to be there, definitely with my kids.
I think that's an interesting, an interesting sort of segue around how disabled people are viewed as not being able to take care of others, that we are a population who requires care, when in fact we know that the true relationship at its best with our family and friends is a give and take. You know, as parents, we raise our children, we help our children, but sometimes we also need support. Can we talk a bit about some challenges about moving in with our folks, and how you worked on those challenges? Because I think sometimes it can be really stressful. But along with the good comes sometimes some stressful things.
And I'll go with that. There were some stresses. Like I said, my parents were aging at that point, so they themselves had doctor's appointments, and my mother was on dialysis at that point. And so we had to make sure that everything she needed for that process to happen was there. Either she was going out of the house, did she get the transportation, or if we were doing in the house, you know, you have to be extremely hygienic to be able to do that at home. And so, you know, there was a lot of care going back. So the challenge was I getting the rest? Was I able to even be there? Especially my first son, we noticed very early, would be on the autism spectrum. And so he needed support. So I kind of sometimes felt very stretched on, was I taking care of me and the things that I needed, as well as finding out, and we're talking, I'm going to date myself now, 30 years ago, my son was born. So you think about autism 30 years ago, trying to find that support, and then also trying to help aging parents. So that whole sandwich generation, I lived it, and sometimes it was challenging.
I think, you know, the sandwich generation, that sort of phenomenon, happens to disabled people too, and it can be extra complicated when we need to take care of ourselves. Judy, can I ask, what did you do to take care of yourself while you were sort of taking care of everybody else?
It was really hard, you know, because within after my first son was born, unfortunately my marriage dissolved. And so at that point, I even became a single parent. And so it literally was, you know, when everybody was fine, I would find a way just to spend time unwinding. My biggest thing that I learned that I could actually do was gardening. That was one of my favorite things to do, to kind of feel like I had some control and that I could bring something to life. And that it was very relaxing to me to just putter around in the dirt or in the garden when I had that time to do it.
Yeah. And I also just wanted to say very quickly, your point about, you know, living in New York and that being very expensive. You know, we are definitely seeing, we're just outside of Boston here at Brandeis, and we are definitely seeing this. And I'm seeing lots of people in my own circle of people with disabilities who they and their families are just realizing the rent is too high, and really having to take a step back and think of other ways to handle living arrangements. Jenny, do you want to take a minute and talk about sort of what were some of the challenges around living in a multi-generational family as a person with a disability who was trying to parent? It's a lot.
So with me, as I said, my mother was only 21 when I was born. So there were a lot of mistakes made. So one thing that with what I noticed with my parents is that they were so afraid that I was going to make a mistake, whether I was going to drop him, that they kind of tried to take over.
Mhm.
And so I had to assert myself a little more strongly because they were trying to take over. And then as I noticed that, because Edward has always been very patient with me. My son is great. So he would squirm for example, he would squirm for everybody else as they were changing his diaper. Everybody else but me. Like he would sit still for me to change his diaper. Because he knew, I think he instinctively knew that, I needed, time, a little bit more extra time. I had to fight because Latina moms are very opinionated. So I'm like, okay, no, you can't do this. There were recommendations from the doctor that she's like, okay, no, he's wrong. I'm like, okay, but
Yeah.
no.
What sorts of things did you have differing opinions on, if I can
Okay,
ask?
so WIC does not, they tell you not to give a baby water,
Mhm.
like straight water before they're 4 months old, because their kidneys are not strong enough to filter water. And she's like, no, it's okay. You give them a little bit of water. I'm like, no, you can't.
Yeah.
You cannot. That can cause other issues later. No, don't do it. So it was a lot of arguing, like, no, their kidneys, because I looked it up. I'm like, okay, no, you can't do that because their kidneys are not strong enough to filter.
Mhm. Mhm.
There were a lot of times when they were like, well, I'm going to take the baby because I know you can't take care of him here. So they would take the baby. So, and I'd be like upset. And yeah, I had a lot of time to read and a lot of time to fester.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some issues that I'm working out, thankfully, with some mental health professionals. Because you have to heal from some of the mistakes that were made out of care for you, because it all came from a place of love.
Yeah.
It wasn't a place of, they weren't trying to do this on purpose. They were just afraid. It's fear. And there's a lot of fear when it comes to disabled parents with disabilities, mothers with disabilities. Like, how are you going to do this? I'm like, Mom, I'm just going to adapt and roll. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to adapt and roll.
Yeah. I love that. Adapt and roll. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I think, that was a really great example of sort of the tensions, unfortunately, that we can have, even when they come from a good place. Who won the battle of the bottle of water with Edward? Can I ask?
That was me.
That was you. All right.
It was me.
Yeah. Judy, did you find that you had any particular challenges with your family when you were trying to raise your children in that environment where other people were wanting to help, but maybe the help wasn't particularly helpful or needed? How did that work for you?
Yeah, I was going to piggyback on there with Jenny because not just Latina mamas, but I had a mom from the Caribbean, and oh my goodness, there were all these traditions. You're not supposed to go out of the house for 9 weeks, but there's a 6-week checkup that we have to go to. There were things that you were supposed to be doing in your body to wrap it a certain way. Well, I have back issues. You can't wrap my back the way you think I should be wrapping it. There were food issues as well as what you should be doing. Do you swallow the baby or not? So yeah, sometimes the traditions bump up against, what our modern science or doctors are telling us to do. One of the biggest one was food. And because I began to notice that my son was exhibiting certain behaviors that led us to know that he was on the spectrum, I was very concerned about the kind of food he ate, when he ate, and he was very particular anyway. well, my family's like, you're being too picky. Just let him eat whatever he wants to, they feed babies, all sorts of things. And I was like, no, we can't do that. So we did kind of run up against a lot of traditions. There wasn't so much of a question of whether I could mother, but whether I was going to have enough energy to do what I needed to do. So that came a question sometimes, but it really was a lot about tradition against modern living. And, and me having to, like Jenny, assert that, hey, this is my baby. I've been educated, I've learned, there's all these people helping me understand, and I'm doing the right thing.
I think it's particularly challenging when you're all under the same roof. Having had to go back home and live with my own parents before I became a mother, which I think was probably a little easier, but you're all under the same roof. You're getting some pressure or some pushback about the way you're parenting your child. You have a disability, so you may be sensitive to that pushback because you might see it also out in society, but yet you're getting it at home and you're under the same roof. And you can't just get away.
Amen.
Jenny,
So true.
Jenny, how were you able to sort of like create those boundaries?
So I'm going to be honest here. I had to leave. I had to leave. Because it got to the point to where I needed to bond with my son. And I knew the bond was there, but I needed to feel like his mother. I didn't want to feel like the vessel that brought him into the world. Because for my parents, and still to this day, the sun sets and rises on Edward. And keep in mind, they have 2 other grandchildren, and 1 on the way. But the sun sets and rises on Edward.
Mm-hmm.
I think it has a lot to do with some experiences that my mother and my father had as parents, and experiencing child loss at a very young age, because unfortunately they lost 2 children, and my son looks like their 2 sons. I mean, he looks like their 2 sons that passed away. So there was a lot of tension there.
Mm-hmm.
When I lived with them, they were very helpful, but they forgot about me, and everything was all about Edward.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, I need my son too. I need to spend time with him too. I mean, I wanted to hold him, and it almost felt like a privilege. So I had to work on establishing boundaries. And when I realized that those boundaries weren't being respected, I had to go.
Yeah. That's really heavy, Jenny. Thank you for sharing that, though. That's really heavy. I think, again, grandparents come from a good place, but it's hard when we feel like they are sort of taking over our duties as parents or pushing us aside. And I just wanted to add really quickly, because I forgot to mention on the slide, for disabled parents who receive home and community-based services, such as personal care attendants, in all of these programs are state-based and they can be very different. But one sort of universal truth of these programs is that they're there to help the disabled person, not necessarily the disabled parent with their parenting tasks. Sometimes PCA care is misconstrued. If we allow them to take care of our children, it's misconstrued as babysitting. So this is a huge care need. And, sometimes grandparents might step in because other caretakers that maybe come in the home can't help with the child. And sometimes I feel like, Jenny, did you feel like you needed their support? Like, in terms of helping you with him and diaper changing? You're on mute.
Just 1 second. Am I unmuted?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I will be very honest and transparent in saying that I did need their help. I needed their help. They are and will continue to be amazing grandparents. They are one of the most wonderful grandparents, and as young as they were when they had, you know, my siblings and me, they are amazing grandparents. They still, you know, they were still very opinionated. My father too. Being that Edward struggles with ADHD, when my mom says, hey, let me take Edward for the weekend, I'm like, run, take him, just go. And I just wanted to correct one thing though, that bio, I forgot to mention that Edward is now 12.
Oh my
So
goodness.
Edward,
Oh my goodness.
yes.
I'm going to make sure that's updated for us.
Yeah,
too.
Edward is now 12. He will be 13 in March. So he is ADHD and he's 13 going on 40. So sometimes now, especially now, I'm like, Mom, just take him. I don't want him anymore. You can have him. No, I'm just joking. I mean, he's an amazing child.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have been able to make it without my parents' support. As much as they tried to jump in and, you know, I wouldn't have been able to make it without their support.
Yeah.
They were amazing people.
Yeah. Judy, I know you mentioned sort of swaddling the baby and food. Was there anything specifically related to your disability and your parenting? Were there times where that was particularly challenging with your family, like with Jenny's parents kind of coming in strongly? Did you experience that or other challenges specifically as a disabled parent?
You know, most of it was around what I mentioned, but you know, if I was having a really off day, because at that time with my vision, I would get migraines. And so, you know, different things of that nature. There was a kind of possessiveness that happened. This was their first grandchild, my oldest, and they were very possessive. I always tell the story that when I came home from the hospital, my father was dressed in a suit. And it was almost a Kunta Kinte moment where he came out and took the baby out of the car seat. I was not allowed to touch the baby. And they came in and they were like praying over the baby. I mean, everybody was dressed up. So it was a lot of possessiveness. Unfortunately, you know, fortunately, in a lot of ways, we would just work that out. I knew that they were aging and that they really shouldn't be alone. So there would be times that if we disagreed, especially over my son, and his name is Andrew, you know, we would just kind of go in our separate corners, and Andrew would stay with grandmom, you know, because at that point she was, you know, going through dialysis and different other things that were going on with her health. And so he became like a little companion to her. But I do want to say that as often as I could, I took the baby with me wherever I went, because I needed breaks. I needed breaks from, you know, caring for the baby and caring for aging parents. And I needed to kind of just unwind. So I was a typical New Yorker. I really didn't drive a lot, but I would get on the bus and just, you know, let's go down to the library or let's go here. And I would take him with me just so we could have, like Jenny was talking about, that bonding time. So I stayed with them until, and very unfortunately, I was getting to, was that when my son was about 3.5 years old, both of them passed away. They literally passed away within 6.5, 7 weeks of each other. And so I tell people that was actually one of the hardest parts of my life, was that, you know, as much as they loved their first grandson, they did not get to see him grow up. And so I had to also deal with that. But the challenge really was, you know, related to freedom. You know, they mean well, they mean the best intentions, But if I were down one day, because of migraine or because my back hurt, it was all about, oh, we'll take him, you go do something else. But then when you wanted to say, okay, I'm feeling better, it was hard to come back and say, I'm good. Then it was like, no, you're going to be down in a couple of more minutes. No, I'm good. So we had that kind of tug of war as well, going back and forth. So that was really the biggest challenge, as well as taking care of them. You can't stay up all night with the baby. You need to rest too.
Mhm.
And they wouldn't sometimes rest because they would be like, okay, we'll get to him before you do. I've got him, So yeah, all of those little challenges of day-to-day living, like you said, under one roof.
Yeah, but they can add up. Can we pivot a little bit and talk about what went well, like what was good about this arrangement? What did you take forward after you were living on your own? What was good? What worked well, both for yourself as a person with a disability, but also as a parent with a disability?
I guess I'll go first. For the short time that we were this multi-generational family, it was really good to have family around. It really, really made a difference, especially as my marriage began to dissolve. There was one point where my mom was like, you'll always have your family. And so it was very good to make those connections at the end of their life. And my oldest son doesn't always remember, but I will, remind him of those memories that we had, that, you had your grandparents, they loved you. He was named after my, actually, he's not, the second son is named after my dad. But it was all about that family time, that I'm very into that now. I don't want my family to be way across different states. I really don't like that. I really want us to be nearby. We never know what can happen. I also apply this to how I work in the community. I don't treat a person with a disability or support a person with a disability as if they're all by themselves. You're in a family. You either have children or you have, a sibling, or you have aunts and uncles. How does that whole dynamic work? And I think that's one of the biggest things I took away from that, is sometimes you really have to support the whole family.
That's great. I think, in this country, we're so much about independence, and independence being the gold standard, when really maybe the answer is more interdependence.
That's
and
my word.
Recognizing that sometimes I'm helping and sometimes I'm receiving help, and that's normal. Like, that's what we want, Jenny, how about you? What worked well? What did you take forward, both for you and your son?
So my mother was an entrepreneur. She had a restaurant. So, and my significant other, he's my quote unquote husband, as I like to call him. He also works in a kitchen. So Edward kind of got the best of both worlds, in that sense of, he knows things that, most kids at 12, at 3 wouldn't know. He knows what the sound of boiling water is. He knows, certain scents and garlics. He knows, he has a very advanced, the child likes sushi. So he's very, and because he's exposed to both cultures, because my significant other, he's white, and so my parents are they're very Mexican, and my son, he speaks not a word of Spanish, but he understands it, and I switch, and so he's learned to switch. So he's like, okay, and when he says certain words, he pronounces it flawlessly, but he always has that there's that heart that he lived with. You know what I mean? That he has like that connection to his grandparents and that support that I know that I will always have, whether they're here on this earthly plane. You know, I had that because they are amazing grandparents.
Yeah.
And it connects me to my past, to my memories with my grandparents.
Yeah.
So, you know, as much as, you know, I had to assert myself and form some very strong boundaries, I know that they're there. And I love the concept of family. I couldn't imagine living far away from my family. What are you talking about? That's not cool. Like, I have a total of 63 cousins, first cousins alone. Like, family is family.
Oh, I love that. I love that. That's a hard act to follow, Jenny. I really love that. And you know, sometimes I hear a lot of themes happening here, which I think transcend whatever our disability is. And they're so fantastic because sometimes when you're a disabled person and maybe your disability does not have a genetic component or a hereditary component, so there's no one else in your family that looks like you or moves like you or talks like you or sees like you. Sometimes we hear, you know, that can be very ostracizing and you sort of feel like you don't belong in your own family. But it sounds like, you know, both of you have family ties. You have, Jenny, you certainly mentioned some family ties that I think transcend that. Judith, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so yes, I do. I grew up, you know, I am the most visually impaired. Most of my family is just wearing reading glasses. I have a degenerative vision condition that doesn't seem to be connected to anyone in the family. Being born, I'm hearing impaired on my right side. So that was a big issue. And then very early on, I began to have back issues. So now the back issues actually are hereditary from my dad's side of the family. But everything else, this kind of like, oh, you've got all this going on, was just not something my family knew how to deal with. And so again, part of what I like to do is help people. You know, when you come out of a hospital or you come out of a doctor's office, all you have is a bunch of paper about what's going on with you. But does your family know how you feel, how to help you deal, how to help you maybe do research on the support groups you need or whatever? So a lot of that I learned because I was kind of like this little unicorn in the family. I learned that, you know, families need help sometimes making that person feel like they're part of everything. So it's really, you know, and it could be something simple. So I'll give you an example. I grew up in a lot of faith-based events and church and all of that. And so being in a church, I cannot take a whole lot of noise going on around me. It drives me crazy, but you know, that's how I grew up. And so, you know, trying to tell my parents, hey, I want to come in after all the singing and everything else, they didn't understand that. But then when I had my son, and he doesn't like a lot of loud noises, just period, because of being on the spectrum, I totally got it. And I said, we can come after this, you know, goes on. And so then he began to go to church. So sometimes it's just helping families realize, how do you support the person and still be a family? And, you know, pass on these wonderful memories and traditions and, you know, family feelings, but that person needs support, you know?
Yeah, I love this. Do either of you have any last thoughts before we open it up? I think we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, I just want to get to some of the questions. I would love to
Yeah,
hear what people have
yeah,
to
I'm gonna share my screen really quick and hopefully it'll work. Seems to have been a bit of an issue. Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, there we go. We're good now. Yeah, we want to open it up for questions. So, Amy Abushanab is here with us. She's our assistant director. And I'm hoping that she can sort of help me field some questions if they come in. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat.
Thanks, Nicole. We've had one question come in that I've seen. And that's, what is a piece of advice you'd give to a new parent who's co-parenting or living with their parents and the child's grandparents?
That's deep. Jenny, do you want to go first? I got to think of something.
Probably in my case, is learn to be assertive and learn to be open to advice. Because they mean well. And maybe you want, just because they give you advice doesn't mean you have to take it. You just say, okay, I'll take it into consideration and, follow your gut.
I think my piece of advice would be something on that line, but keep the lines of communication open. Being, like she said, honest, but communicate when you're not feeling up to par. Communicate when you are, ready to do things. Especially sometimes first-time moms, we just think everything's got to be perfect and just so. And so, but communicate how you're feeling, what you really need. If people are stepping over those boundaries, and that's all doing with the family dynamic, but the more you can communicate, the better it's going to be over the long haul.
We had a question coming. We have some practitioners and some social workers on the call today. And I'm just wondering, for either of you, if you were receiving services of some sort while you were living with your family, like if you had a case manager or another social worker, do you think it would be helpful for parents with disabilities to sort of utilize a social worker's skill to sort of mediate conversations around boundaries? Because sometimes that can be really tough in this situation, and we've certainly touched on that. So do you see a role for social workers here?
I always see a role for social work. I love social workers. I think they wear so many hats. And so if they can help facilitate conversations or touchy subjects, or, I always remember, and this is funny, it wasn't for me, it was for my mom, since she was going through so much stuff. We had a home health care worker, we had social workers coming in, we had so many people coming in. And often I would sit and talk with them. So they know a lot of the family dynamic. Any way that you can help people move smoothly or smoother through being in one home and as a family, please do so. Even if it's just, here are some resources, here's some research I did, or different things like that. That really does help.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's fantastic. Okay, we just have a few more minutes. So if there are any other questions, please put them in the chat. In the Q&A, we have a survey. If you could fill that survey out for us, that would be so helpful. We use your feedback along with the feedback from our advisory boards, which is comprised of disabled parents, to ensure that we continue to provide relevant content and talk about the issues like this one that no one's really touched on yet, but we needed to. I'm gonna real quick share my screen again. Maybe, can you see that? Can you see the question slide?
Yes.
Okay, so and of course it's frozen. We are just mired in technical difficulties today. Try it one more time. Let me just check the chat box. One more time. Okay, my screen is completely frozen. I apologize. Oh my goodness. But I want to thank everyone for coming today, and Oh, there we go. Okay, here's some resources for you. We'll be posting these slides on our website. We have a tab on our website with all of our data and all of the things we're putting out here. We're trying to do a lot of work at Lurie that is very relevant to the lives of disabled people. So there are other resources here, and we will post this PowerPoint. And here's our contact information. And everyone, thank you so much for coming today. And Judy and Jennifer, thank you both especially.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. You did great. Survey, right?